I stood in the entryway of our home, a place I had lovingly furnished, cleaned, and imagined raising a child in, and the world outside the narrow glass panels of the front door seemed to tilt sideways. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish, a scent my mother-in-law, Eleanor, insisted was the only one that signaled true cleanliness. That scent now felt like the sickening perfume of malice. I was 7 months pregnant. My belly was heavy, round, and an undeniable testament to the future I was building. Yet, standing there, my hands trembling as they clutched the gold-foiled legal document, I felt physically lighter, as if the shock had drained the very air from my lungs. The paper demanded we vacate the premises in 30 days. This was not a random landlord's maneuver, it was a targeted strike. The first wave of shock was the timing. Who serves eviction papers to their pregnant daughter-in-law? The second wave was the realization that the eviction wasn't an isolated incident. It was synchronized with the malicious draining of our entire life savings, money she had access to through a forgotten power of attorney. She hadn't just removed our home, she had removed our cushion, ensuring we were financially crippled and unable to fight back or find a suitable new apartment before the baby arrived. I looked down at the signature, Eleanor Hawthorne, tight, precise, and utterly ruthless. She didn't want us out, she wanted us ruined. She saw my child not as a grandchild, but as a liability she needed to cut loose. In that paralyzed moment of devastating realization, an insidious calm washed over me. The tears didn't come. Instead, a cold, unwavering thought formed in my mind, a thought far more powerful than the fear, far more enduring than the betrayal. She thought she removed my home. She didn't realize she had just given me a reason to take hers. I folded the papers, the crisp sound a declaration of war, and began to search for the only weapon that could truly neutralize Eleanor Hawthorne: justice fueled by an unbreakable will. The scent of lemon, polish, and stale cigarette smoke hung heavy in the air of the small hallway, a familiar, cloying mix that had defined the first 2 years of my marriage. I stood on the worn floral carpet, 7 months pregnant, clutching a cardboard box full of our baby's tiny, soft socks, and stared at the gold foil lettering on the legal document in my hand. The eviction notice felt cold, but the betrayal was colder. It wasn't the formal language, notice to vacate, lease violation, that made the blood rush from my head. It was the signature scrawled at the bottom, tight and aggressive, the one I recognized instantly, the same signature that had graced every birthday card and holiday check for the last decade. Eleanor Hawthorne, my mother-in-law. She owned the house we rented, a fact she never let us forget, but I never imagined she would use that power like a weapon. Not now, not while I was carrying her grandchild. Life before the paperwork was a study in comfortable compromise. I met Daniel, Eleanor's only son, in college. He was quiet, steady, and had the kind of reliable kindness that felt like coming home. I was a librarian, thriving on order and the quiet hum of knowledge. Daniel was a high school history teacher, perpetually surrounded by stacks of papers and the faint, comforting smell of chalk dust. When we married, the question of housing was settled quickly, and I realize now, dangerously. Eleanor owned several rental properties in our city, the legacy of a shrewd, ambitious first husband. She offered us a small, 3-bedroom house near Daniel's school at a reduced, family rate. "It keeps the asset in the family, darling," she had purred, handing us the keys with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "And it ensures my little Danny is taken care of." Eleanor was a woman of immaculate surfaces and sharp edges. She dressed impeccably, never allowed a hair out of place, and viewed her son as a prized, if slightly delicate, possession. Our relationship was characterized by a delicate dance. I was constantly trying to prove I was worthy of her son, and she was constantly finding minor flaws in my execution. My cooking was too spicy. My career was too quiet. My choice of curtains was a mistake. Still, our life inside the house was warm. Daniel and I built a quiet bubble of happiness there. We had a ritual every Friday night: take-out pizza, bad sci-fi movies, and the sound of his low, rumbling laughter that always settled the anxious knot in my stomach. The house itself, old and slightly drafty, felt like ours because it held our memories. The faint scratch on the living room floor from when we awkwardly assembled a bookshelf, the small garden where Daniel insisted on trying to grow tomatoes every summer. The announcement of the pregnancy was met with shared, overwhelming joy between Daniel and me. We sat on the worn couch, his hand resting on my abdomen, the future unfolding bright and immediate. With Eleanor, the joy was different. "A baby," she said, her voice dry as parchment when I called to tell her. There was no squeal of delight, only a measured assessment. Well, that certainly changes things. This house is far too small, Sarah. And really, that neighborhood is entirely unsuitable for a Hawthorne. I chose to interpret her criticism as concern. I told myself she was just an anxious grandmother. I told myself that once she saw the ultrasound, once she felt the reality of the baby, her hard exterior would soften. I was so wrong. The tension started not with a bang, but with a series of persistent, irritating drips. After I hit the 6-month mark and the pregnancy was undeniable, Eliner's visits, which had always been announced and formal, started becoming surprise inspections. I would be at work and Daniel would call, sounding strained. Mom just dropped by. She wanted to check the plumbing. She was looking in the nursery closet. Then came the subtle, unnerving comments. We were discussing plans for the nursery over a strained Sunday dinner at her pristine home, the kind of home that smelled only of expensive air freshener, never of actual life. I enthusiastically described the crib we had chosen, a sturdy wooden model that converts to a toddler bed. Eliner didn't look at me, she looked at Daniel. That wood looks rather porous, Danny. You know that house has a slight damp issue in the winter. You wouldn't want the baby breathing in mold. Mom, the inspection was fine, Daniel said, reaching for my hand under the table. She dismissed him with a subtle, sharp wave of her silver manicured hand. Inspections are for show, darling. I know that house. It's too old. It's time for you two to upgrade, especially now that the dynamic is changing. That phrase, the dynamic is changing, came up constantly. She didn't sound happy about the change. She sounded threatened by it, as if my growing belly was a hostile takeover. Then, the truly strange things began. Daniel received an email from Eliner's property manager, not the sweet old lady who usually handled her rentals, but a new, young, and aggressively formal man named Richard. The email requested up-to-date income verification documents for the entire household, as mandated by a new portfolio review. It was odd, unnecessary paperwork for a family lease agreement that had been running smoothly for years. I asked Daniel about it, a faint tremor of unease running through me. "It's Mom, Sarah," he sighed, already fatigued by the constant management of his mother. "She's probably bored. Just send him the pay stubs. It's harmless bureaucracy." I sent the documents, trying to quiet the voice in my head that warned me, Eliner does nothing that is harmless. Every action is a move on a chessboard. I found myself pausing in the middle of preparing dinner, listening to the silence of the old house, feeling the baby kick, and realizing that the silence felt less like peace and more like the quiet, calculated pause before a trap snaps shut. My focus had been entirely on the tiny new life I was creating, but I hadn't noticed that the foundation beneath me was already being hollowed out. The final, sickening clue came during a seemingly innocuous trip to the hardware store for nursery paint. Daniel had left his wallet at home, so I offered to pay with the debit card linked to our joint account. The card was immediately declined. I tried again. Declined. I called the bank from the store parking lot, my breath catching in my throat as I listened to the automated message. The account had been drained, not emptied, but meticulously reduced to a few dollars over the minimum balance. It was an amount too specific to be an error. It looked like someone had left just enough to avoid an immediate alarm. I knew, with the cold, absolute certainty that only comes with facing an undeniable truth, who had done it. But why? I stood in the cold parking lot of the hardware store, the paint chips for the nursery clutched in my hand, and the receiver of my cell phone pressed so tightly against my ear I could hear the tinny echo of my own frantic heartbeat. "Yes, ma'am." The withdrawal was executed under a standing power of attorney held by the account co-signer, Eliner Hawthorne. The bank representative stated, his voice calm, professional, and utterly devoid of sympathy. I repeated the words slowly, needing to hear them again to process the monstrous simplicity of the truth. Power of attorney, but she hasn't had access to our account since we refinanced the car 5 years ago. I specifically removed her from all signing authority then. It appears the power of attorney was reactivated and executed 2 weeks ago, ma'am. All withdrawals, totaling $25,000, were legally authorized by the signer. $25,000, our emergency fund. The money earmarked for the hospital bill, the 6 months of leave I planned to take, and the college savings we'd barely started. It was gone. Not stolen by a stranger, but methodically drained by the woman who was supposed to be the matriarch of our growing family. I drove home in a blinding, silent fury, the steering wheel slick with sweat. The familiar comforts of the old house, the worn Persian rug, the slightly crooked painting over the fireplace, now felt like a set designed for a tragedy. Daniel was home early, sitting at the kitchen table grading papers, the air filled with the quiet scratch of his red pen. He looked up, sensing the shift in the atmosphere the moment I walked in. "Hey, you look pale. Did they not have the right shade of seafoam green?" he asked, trying to smile. I didn't answer him. I dropped the paint chips onto the table, the small pieces scattering like evidence. Then I placed the bank statement, folded to the withdrawal line, in front of him. "Why did your mother drain our account, Daniel?" I asked, my voice dangerously low, stripped of emotion. It wasn't a question, it was a demand for accountability. Daniel glanced at the statement, then froze. His eyes scanned the name, the amount, the date. The color drained from his face, mirroring the shock I had felt in the parking lot. "Sarah, I don't know what this is. This has to be a mistake." "She would," he trailed off, his denial already sounding weak. "She would, Daniel," the bank confirmed it. "She reactivated the power of attorney. She took $25,000. Did you know about this?" He pushed back from the table, standing up so abruptly his chair scraped backward on the tile floor. "No, God no, why would she do that? She knows we need that money for the baby." He ran a hand through his hair, his distress genuine, but his refusal to acknowledge his mother's capacity for malice was maddening. "Why did she have the access, Daniel? Why did she request the income verification?" "The documents Richard asked for, were they for a lease renewal, or was she calculating exactly how much she could steal without us being completely ruined immediately?" He looked defeated, his usual steady composure fracturing. "I don't know, Sarah. I'm going to call her right now." The phone call was short and brutal. Daniel walked out onto the small back porch, the screen door swinging shut behind him, leaving me alone in the oppressive silence of the kitchen. I couldn't hear Alina's words, but I could hear the rising pitch of Daniel's voice, turning from confused frustration to pleading, then to a horrified silence. When he finally came back inside, the air seemed to solidify around him. His face was gray, his eyes wide and hollow. She said the account was never fully removed from her control. She said she was protecting her investment in case things went south. He swallowed hard, his voice barely a rasp. And then she said that she needed the money for the down payment, for the house. "Down payment for what house, Daniel? We already live here." He avoided my eyes, finally admitting the terrible truth. "She didn't just reactivate the POA, Sarah. She never removed her name from the title of this house's mortgage, even though we pay the rent. She was worried about the liability if we defaulted." He corrected himself, his voice trembling. "She said she has accepted a full-price cash offer on the property. We have 30 days to vacate." The eviction notice, the drained account, the strange paperwork. It was a perfectly executed, synchronized attack. She wasn't trying to worry us. She was trying to bankrupt and displace us before the baby arrived, using the cash withdrawal to secure her own financial safety net against us finding a new place or hiring a lawyer. My world tilted. I felt a sudden, sharp pain in my side. I grabbed the counter for balance, the shock giving way to a white-hot, singular focus. "And you knew nothing about this sale?" I asked, the question hanging between us like a physical blow. I saw an appraiser here last month, but she said it was just a routine valuation for her portfolio. I believed her, Sarah. I believed her," he insisted, tears finally welling up in his eyes. He reached for me, but I stepped back, the sight of his weakness and his blind, enabling trust in his monstrous mother hardening my resolve. It wasn't just Alina who betrayed me. Daniel had betrayed me by his passive compliance, by his inability to protect his own family from his own blood. He was grieving his mother's treachery, but I was grieving the loss of my home, my savings, and my trust in him, all at once. I spent the next 48 hours in a state of quiet, devastating efficiency. The tears didn't come, they were frozen solid somewhere deep inside me, replaced by a crystalline clarity. The eviction notice gave us 30 days. The drained bank account meant those 30 days felt like a ticking time bomb. Daniel was a wreck. He went through the predictable cycles of guilt, anger at his mother, and then a strange, sad paralysis. He kept repeating, "I'll talk to her, Sarah. I'll make her see reason. She just needs to meet the baby." His faith in Alina's non-existent humanity was the final straw. "Stop, Daniel," I finally said, sitting across from him at the kitchen table, the eviction notice spread between us. "Your mother doesn't operate on reason, she operates on leverage. She removed our cushion, sold the house out from under us, and issued this eviction all at once. She didn't want to hurt us. She wanted to eliminate us as a financial and emotional concern for her son." I stood up and started walking toward the small, built-in desk where we kept the household files. And while you're trying to appeal to her motherly instincts, I'm going to appeal to the only thing she respects: the law. My plan wasn't born out of vindictive rage. It was born out of a cold, protective instinct. I was 7 months pregnant. I needed a home and security for my child, and Alina had systematically stolen both. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was seeking restitution and an unbreakable safety net. My first call wasn't to a landlord, but to an attorney specializing in real estate and family law. I chose a woman named Clara Vance, whose reputation for quiet, brutal competence preceded her. When I sat in Clara's sleek, modern office, a stark contrast to the dust and betrayal of our old house, I didn't cry or plead. I laid out the timeline: the surprise inspections, the income verification, the suspicious appraiser, the reactivated power of attorney, the drained account, and the eviction notice. I presented it like a business case, highlighting Alina's deliberate malice and her breach of fiduciary duty regarding the joint funds. Clara listened, her pen hovering over a yellow legal pad. "You're not fighting the eviction, Sarah. You're fighting the financial weaponization of the lease. You want the money back, and you want a stable place to live." "Yes," I confirmed, "and I want to ensure that Alina Hawthorne can never financially manipulate us or her grandson again." I explained that I didn't want the house back. I wanted to buy the house myself. Clara looked surprised. "You just told me she drained your savings." "She drained our savings. But I have 2 other things. First, a small inheritance my grandmother left me, untouchable and in a separate account, which Daniel doesn't know about. It's not enough to buy the house outright, but it's a significant start. Second, Daniel's paralysis. He's so busy trying to manage his mother's feelings, he's not managing the crisis. I need to act before he either begs her to stop or agrees to move into some terrible attic apartment she finds for us." Clara's thin lips curved into a slow, professional smile. "You want to beat her at her own game. You want to buy her investment before she can sell it to someone else." The sale was cash only, a quick close, precisely the kind of deal Alina liked. This meant she probably already had a buyer lined up, but she was meticulous. She needed the house empty before the sale could close, hence the eviction. The clock was running down on the 30 days. I worked with Clara's team and a mortgage broker who specialized in rapid closings. The inheritance provided the down payment, and my clean credit and steady job qualified me for the necessary financing. The key was speed and absolute secrecy. Daniel remained oblivious. He was too consumed by his own pain, spending evenings alternating between passive resentment and frantic attempts to find a new, suitable rental in a market where every decent place required a huge security deposit, money we didn't have, thanks to his mother. He never asked about my financial maneuvering. He just assumed I was handling the physical packing and searching, which suited my plan perfectly. I let him believe I was weak and preoccupied. I stopped packing the baby's clothes and started packing only my necessary files. The original lease, the POA revocation papers from 5 years ago, the bank statements. Every piece of paper was a nail in the coffin of Alina's self-righteous cruelty. I had 30 days to finalize the mortgage, secure the appraisal, and submit a competitive, binding offer. Alina had accepted a cash offer, which meant the price was firm and likely generous. But Clara found the perfect lever. A clause in our original, seemingly innocuous lease that gave us right of first refusal if the property were ever sold during the tenancy, even if the tenancy was ending. It was a common, almost throwaway clause Daniel had insisted on years ago, forgotten by everyone but now, a golden ticket. I was fighting for my son's right to stability, and the battlefield was a set of dusty legal documents. I realized I was far stronger than the gentle, soft-spoken librarian Daniel thought he married. I was a lioness protecting her den, and I was ready to roar. The end of the 30-day eviction period loomed like a thunderhead. I was physically exhausted, running on the sheer adrenaline of indignation and the fierce need to establish a safe harbor before my son arrived. The paperwork for the loan was agonizing, but Clara Vance was relentless, pushing the bank and the title company with cold professionalism. On the 28th day, everything was ready. The financing was secured, the title search completed, and the legal documents proving our right of first refusal were bound in a thick, confident blue folder. The timing was crucial. Alina's accepted cash offer was scheduled to close on day 31. We had to intervene before the transfer was finalized. I scheduled a mandatory meeting with Daniel and Alina for 6:00 p.m. that evening, 2 days before the eviction deadline. I sent the invitation via email, a formal calendar request titled, "Final Discussion Regarding 123 Sycamore Street." Alina, who lived for formal occasions, accepted immediately. Daniel, grateful for any plan that didn't involve him carrying heavy boxes, accepted with relief. The meeting was held at a neutral location, a small, reserved room at a local law library, my turf, in the quiet, imposing atmosphere of legal authority. I arrived first, followed by a pale, anxious Daniel. Alina swept in precisely at 6:00 p.m., impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, carrying a Hermes handbag and smelling faintly of expensive jasmine. She looked victorious, completely assured of her moral superiority and her success. "Sarah," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "I know this is difficult for you, but it's for the best. You simply aren't equipped to handle this level of financial responsibility. Danny and the baby will be safer once they move into the apartment I found for them." I remained standing behind the table, my hands resting lightly on the blue folder. Daniel looked between us, his face creased with misery. "Mom, please just let us stay a little longer," Daniel pleaded, his voice cracking. "Sarah is due in a few weeks. We have nowhere else to go." Alina turned to her son, her expression hardening into the patronizing pity she always reserved for his supposed failures. "Daniel, stop being so dramatic. You're a teacher. You're not a real estate magnate. I am protecting your future. The buyers are waiting. Sarah needs to understand that the house is sold. It's out of our hands." I took a deep breath, the movement tightening the skin over my swollen belly. The calm that flooded me was absolute. It was the calm of a person who holds the winning hand in a game of high-stakes poker. "Actually, Alina," I said, my voice steady and measured, cutting through her dismissal. "That is precisely why we are here, because the house is sold, but it is not out of our hands." I opened the blue folder and slid the first page, the copy of our original lease agreement, across the polished mahogany table to her. Alina merely glanced at it, a haughty sneer playing on her lips. "I know the lease, Sarah. It expired at midnight tomorrow. You should be packing, not performing dramatics." "Turn to Section 4, subsection C, Alina. It's highlighted in yellow. The right of first refusal clause," I instructed her, leaning forward slightly. Alina's composure finally began to chip. She squinted at the document. As her eyes landed on the highlighted text, the jasmine seemed to sour, and a flicker of naked fear crossed her features. This clause is unenforceable. It was a boilerplate addition. And besides, you don't have the funds. You're penniless," she hissed, attempting to regain control. I smiled, a small, genuine smile that held no warmth, only triumph. I took the next document, a certified bank check, from the folder and slid it over the table. "This check is for $425,000. It represents the exact amount of the accepted cash offer you signed with your buyer. It is a full, non-contingent counter offer. Pursuant to the right of first refusal, and legally binding as of 5 o'clock this evening, I have officially purchased the house." The silence in that small room was deafening. Daniel let out a shocked, strangled sound, half gasp, half sob. Alina didn't move. She stared at the check, then at the eviction notice, then back at me. Her face, usually so controlled, became a mask of disbelief and sputtering rage. You can't possibly have that kind of money. You stole it. You and Daniel conspired. You have no assets," she shrieked, finally losing her regal composure. The smell of jasmine was entirely replaced by the metallic tang of her panic. "I had an asset, Alina, that you knew nothing about," I stated calmly, touching my belly. "Grandmother's inheritance. It was enough for the down payment and loan security. And as for your $25,000 you stole from our emergency fund, that will be returned to the account by the end of the week, pending a court order filed today by Clara Vance, citing theft and malicious breach of fiduciary duty." I picked up the eviction notice and gently, almost delicately, tore it in half. "You tried to leave us homeless, Alina. You tried to bankrupt your son and your grandchild. But as of now, I am the owner of record for 123 Sycamore Street. The house you tried to sell is no longer your investment, Alina. It is my home." I picked up the thick blue folder, turned to Daniel, whose mouth was still hanging open in shocked silence, and looked him in the eye. "Daniel, you have a decision to make. You can stay and help me build a real life here, one that is protected and financially sound, or you can go home with your mother and continue to enable her cruelty. Either way, the house is now mine. The eviction is lifted." Then, I walked out of the room, leaving the check and the broken pieces of the eviction notice scattered on the table, the silence behind me heavy with the sound of Alina Hawthorne's ruined plans. I didn't wait to see Daniel's reaction or Alina's meltdown. I drove straight from the law library to my temporary rental apartment, feeling the exhaustion finally hit me, but also a deep, bone-weary satisfaction. I had secured the asset. I had won the battle, but the war wasn't over until the consequences of Alina's actions became public knowledge. Daniel came home an hour later. He walked into the small apartment, his face pale and slack. He wasn't angry, he was devastated, not by the loss of the house, which he hadn't known was truly ours anyway, but by the complete, undeniable revelation of his mother's true nature. He sat heavily on the edge of the sofa, running his hands over his face. She's calling her lawyers. She's claiming coercion. She said you stole her checkbook. She can claim whatever she wants, Daniel. Clara filed the necessary paperwork with the title company immediately. The sale is in my name, signed and secured by the right of first refusal clause she conveniently forgot about. The check was a certified bank transfer from my own, separate, verifiable account. The theft was her draining our joint savings, which we are now suing to recover. Your mother is panicking because she realized she used a cannon to fight a water balloon and I used a scalpel. I looked at him, my voice softening slightly, though my resolve remained hard. What did you tell her, Daniel? He lifted his head, his eyes shining with unshed tears. I told her I was staying here. With you. I told her I couldn't be near her right now. I told her that if she cared about me, she would have cared about my child, and she didn't. He hesitated. She accused me of choosing you over her. I told her I was choosing our baby. That was the only real victory I needed. Daniel's eyes were finally open. He was not collateral damage. He was a choice I had to make. His choice to finally break away from his mother's suffocating control was his own act of healing. The public consequence began with the closing of the sale. When the title company notified Alina that the house had been sold, not to the anonymous cash buyer she lined up, but to Sarah Hawthorne, the tenant she was actively trying to evict, the shockwave was immediate. Alina was a fixture in her social circles: the church board, the local women's club, the private school parents' association. Her reputation for sharp business dealings was admired, but her reputation for family loyalty was considered sacrosanct. The news, driven by the furious, sputtering phone calls she made to anyone who would listen, spread like a toxic stain. People didn't hear that Sarah stole the house. They heard that Alina Hawthorne tried to evict her 7 months pregnant daughter-in-law to line her own pockets, and the daughter-in-law beat her in court. My former colleague, Maya, called me. Sarah, I heard it from Mrs. Henderson at book club. Alina is telling everyone you cheated Daniel out of his inheritance, but the story that's actually circulating is about the eviction notice. People are appalled. You tried to make a new mother homeless. It's bad press, darling, very bad press. The moral consequence was swift and devastating. Alina thrived on respectability. She was a woman who saw herself as the arbiter of propriety. Now, she was seen as a greedy, cruel matriarch. Her real estate attorney, a stuffy older gentleman who had handled her affairs for decades, dropped her case regarding the asset recovery. He called Clara directly, telling her, "The optics on this are untenable, Clara. My firm cannot represent a woman who attempted to render her pregnant daughter-in-law homeless. Settle the stolen funds immediately." This forced her hand. The $25,000 she had maliciously withdrawn from our joint account was returned within the week, along with a certified letter from her new, less prestigious lawyer, confirming that she was dropping all further legal challenges regarding the sale. The ultimate consequence was the silent, social shunning. She wasn't dropped from the women's club, but the phone calls stopped. The invitations to her elaborate holiday luncheons dried up. People would nod politely on the street, but no one lingered. She had alienated the one thing she truly valued, her social standing and the perception of her perfect, devoted family. I remained dignified. I never gossiped. When people asked, I gave them the clean, indisputable truth, the same way I presented it in Clara's office. Alina sold the house from under us while I was pregnant. I used a clause in the original lease to buy it myself and protect my son's future. It was a business transaction, not a personal fight. By reframing the action as one of justice and necessity rather than spiteful revenge, I ensured that the moral judgment fell entirely on Alina. She had aimed for financial ruin. I achieved financial security and complete emotional freedom from her control. The day we officially moved back into 123 Sycamore Street felt less like moving and more like reclaiming territory. It wasn't about the physical act of unpacking. It was about the profound emotional shift from being tenants in someone else's house to being homeowners in our own. Daniel and I stood in the empty living room, the late afternoon sun streaming through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. We didn't talk about Alina. We talked about the future. "We need a new lock on the front door," Daniel said quietly, looking at the door handle as if expecting his mother to burst through it. "We have a new lock, Daniel," I replied, holding up a small, shiny key, the key to a house that was legally and unequivocally mine. "And more importantly, we have a clear boundary. We are safe here." The healing process for me began with the physical transformation of the house. We ripped out the worn floral carpet Alina had insisted was classic and installed wide plank wood flooring. We changed the kitchen cabinets, scrubbed away the lemon polish scent, and painted the nursery the seafoam green I had originally chosen, a color that finally felt like hope. Every swing of a hammer, every fresh coat of paint, was a quiet, therapeutic act of severing the old, manipulative ties. But the most significant part of the healing wasn't the house. It was my relationship with Daniel. The shock of his mother's betrayal had finally cracked the shell of his dependence. He had been a man who defaulted to peace, even if it meant sacrificing his own wants for his mother's demanding will. Now, he was protective, actively engaged, and entirely focused on our new life. He didn't resent the fact that the house was legally mine or that my separate inheritance had saved us. He saw it as the ultimate act of love and protection. "You saved us, Sarah," he told me one evening, his eyes full of gratitude, not shame. He was sanding down a rocking chair for the nursery, his hands dusty but purposeful. "If you hadn't been planning, if you hadn't been strong enough to take that action, we would be moving into some tiny, overpriced rental right now, and I would still be fighting Mom." "You made the hardest choice, Daniel," I reminded him. "You chose our baby over her control. That's the real strength." We had established a new rule, a non-negotiable term for our marriage: no business with Alina, no shared finances, no managing her emotions. Daniel upheld this boundary rigorously. He took all of his mother's calls outside, and they were brief, formal, and strictly limited to holiday greetings, no discussions of money, property, or our family. My son, Thomas, arrived 2 weeks early. The hospital stay was calm, financed by the recovered savings, and filled only with the overwhelming joy of new life. Holding Thomas, looking at his tiny, perfect face, the chaos of the past months felt distant and insignificant. The legal battle had secured this quiet, profound moment of peace. I looked at Thomas, sleeping peacefully in the crib in the seafoam green room, and I felt a surge of gratitude, not for the revenge, but for the clarity. Alina had tried to teach me that love was conditional, tied to possessions and compliance. But holding my son, I learned the lesson I needed. True security is not about what you possess, but about the boundaries you are willing to defend. I realized that my true victory wasn't buying her house. It was buying my freedom. I was free from her judgment, free from Daniel's enablement, and free to raise my son in a home built on my own unshakable strength. The house was now a symbol of my resilience, a physical monument to the fact that cruelty and greed do not win when faced with determined love. I even achieved a sense of peaceful closure regarding Alina. I never hated her. I pitied her. She was wealthy, socially respected, and yet so desperately empty that she had to manipulate and destroy her own family to feel important. That realization was my final act of forgiveness, not for her actions, but for the space she occupied in my head. She was irrelevant. We were home. The subsequent years unfolded with a slow, reassuring steadiness. The old house, now truly our home, absorbed the happy chaos of Thomas's early childhood. The scratch on the living room floor from the old bookshelf remained, but now it was joined by the deeper indentations of Thomas's toy truck track. The house didn't just feel stable, it felt lived in and loved. I returned to the library part-time, maintaining my professional life while prioritizing motherhood. The financial security provided by the house, which was now appreciating in value, and the full recovery of our savings meant we lived comfortably, without the specter of financial anxiety that had driven Alina's final, desperate act. Alina remained, as planned, an incredibly distant figure. Daniel saw her on the occasional major holiday, always meeting in neutral, public territory like a coffee shop or a park. He went alone. These meetings were brief, painful, and often ended with Alina making some passive-aggressive comment about our unwise financial choices or my excessive control. Daniel would listen, nod minimally, and then leave, reporting back to me only that she was the same. He no longer sought her approval. He tolerated her existence. Her attempt at social ruin failed spectacularly. She had tried to leverage her social capital against me, but my dignified silence and the objective truth of the public records, an eviction filed against a pregnant woman, followed by the immediate house purchased by the same woman, had backfired. In the small, tight-knit community, Alina was now regarded with a polite coolness, perpetually paying the social tax for her cruelty. The final piece of healing came unexpectedly, several years later, on Thomas's 8th birthday. We were hosting a neighborhood party in our backyard, the same yard where Daniel had tried futilely to grow tomatoes. Now it was flourishing with resilient herbs and bright flowers. I was standing by the grill when Daniel came up to me, holding 2 small glasses of sparkling cider. "I heard from Mom today," he said, his voice neutral. I looked at him, bracing myself for the usual quiet annoyance. "And she called because she heard about the party through someone at the church. She wanted to know if she could come. She said she misses her only grandson." I took a slow sip of the cider, feeling the familiar prickle of protectiveness rise. My first instinct was to say an absolute hard no, but Thomas was older now, smart and aware. "What did you tell her?" I asked Daniel. He looked at me, his eyes clear and steady. "I told her that the house is ours. The boundary is permanent. I told her that she cannot come here because this is our safe space and she hasn't earned the right to share it. I offered to meet her next week for 20 minutes in the park, alone, if she wants an update on Thomas." She hung up. I realized in that moment that my healing wasn't just about my own strength. It was about Daniel's redemption. He was no longer the conflicted boy torn between 2 women. He was a husband and a father who had learned to defend his family against the source of his trauma. "That was the right decision, Daniel," I said, placing my hand on his arm. "I know it was," he replied. "I realized that the last time she was truly happy was when she thought she had control. She can't have that back. This house, our life, it's not hers to control or even to visit. It's ours." I realized the powerful irony of the situation. Alina had spent her life acquiring property as a form of security and control. She believed that ownership meant power. But by forcing me to buy the house, she had inadvertently transferred the very security she craved and the stability she denied us into my hands. She lost her leverage, and I gained my independence. The small, constant worry about being judged or being reliant on others vanished. When Thomas asked about his other grandma, I told him a simplified version of the truth, similar to what I'd told Daniel. That sometimes people confuse love with control, and that we built our home on love, not on control. My life wasn't perfect, but it was authentic. It was noisy, sometimes messy, and full of the profound, simple love of a small family built on courage. The house itself became a silent, solid testament to the fact that when faced with deep betrayal, the most powerful reaction is not anger, but strategic self-preservation. When I look back on that period of my life, the cold eviction notice, the shame of the drained bank account, the overwhelming fear of being homeless while pregnant, it feels like I was watching a film about someone else. But the scars are real, and the lessons are profound. We often think that family loyalty means blind acceptance, that we must tolerate cruelty simply because it comes from blood. But I learned that the most important loyalty you owe is to the innocent life you are responsible for, and to the sanctity of your own peace. My mother-in-law wanted to define me by her limitations, to see me as weak, dependent, and easily disposable. She wanted me to believe that stability was something she granted, not something I could earn. She forced me out, but in doing so, she forced me to stand up. She forced me to find the quiet, determined strength I didn't know I possessed. The house, 123 Sycamore Street, is more than just a roof over our heads. It's a monument to the fact that when you are fighting for what is right, even the most powerful opponent can be outmaneuvered by simple, methodical truth and a little bit of foresight. I didn't seek revenge. I sought justice, and the difference is vital. Revenge is destructive. Justice is about establishing boundaries and ensuring future safety. I protected my son's inheritance, his peace, and in doing so, I gained my own. If you're standing on shaky ground right now, feeling like the people who should lift you up are actively tearing you down, remember this. You have the right to secure your own foundation. You do not need permission to be safe. My journey led me to a place of profound peace and unbreakable financial independence. It cost me a relationship, but it bought me my life back. Would you have been able to keep your cool and use the legal system to fight back, or would the anger have been too much to bear? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story of strategic justice and finding strength in betrayal resonated with you, please consider subscribing. Your support helps us share more tales of resilience and truth, proving that every storm can lead to a beautiful, permanent home. Thank you for listening.